Leaders of Tomorrow, India's only daily television platform for small businesses. We bring you the right information to empower you, the SME entrepreneur. Tonight, a very special panel discussion, decoding what's in store for you, the SME entrepreneur, as we're counting down to the budget. And who better than this expert panel with us here tonight? Let me quickly introduce our experts, starting with Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist, Care Ratings. We also have with us tonight Abhishek Chakraborty, Executive Director, DTDC Express, Rina Nathani, founder and CEO of Find Your Class, and last but not the least, Pushkar Mukewar, co-founder, Trip Capital. I want to kick this off, of course, by talking about the fact that as we are counting down to the 1st of February, we are counting down to that big ticket election. And whenever there's an election and a budget, the expectation is always that it's going to be populist. So maybe I can start with my right and ask you, Pushkar, for your thoughts. Just how populist, let me frame it that way, do you think this budget is going to be or not at all?
So I think, I mean, broadly speaking, you know, the economy is at a state where you know, liquidity has been a big problem. Yeah. So from that standpoint, I do expect measures in this budget which would be geared towards addressing liquidity problems for SMEs. And I think we've already started seeing other populist measures in terms of loan relief for farmers and stuff like that. So sure. At least I expect that that trend is likely to continue in this budget as well. So.
Okay. So to the economist on this panel then, what is your expectation?
No, in fact, I think we should remember that this is an interim budget, and you cannot really have any specific measures which could be appealing to the voters because we have an elections coming about. So therefore, to my mind, the language will obviously be positive. Sure. There will be a lot of propaganda which will go in. So it could be reading like an election manifesto. But if you're looking in terms of the actual money which is being spent or the money which is being earned, there's not going to be much kind of change or any kind of changes in policies coming through. So therefore, I would rather temper expectations, saying let's not expect too much from the budget. A lot of things which had to be done, say for the SME segment, which we are talking of, have already been announced in the last couple of months.
Yeah. Abhishek, you are an expert and a representative of one of the most crucial sectors, and we're talking logistics as well as infrastructure. What is your expectation?
I think the early signs were given last year when this industry was given status by the government. And therefore, we believe that that was a pointer towards the direction which things would have been going. Sure. I think we would have expected a lot more to have happened in the last 1 year in terms of more measures being taken, more announcements being made in terms of special schemes, special arrangements coming through. I guess what might happen is, as Madan was probably talking about, you'll probably get the hints or the contours of what might come if the same government were to be coming back. But I think it's quite clear. This government realizes that if you do not spend on logistics, if you do not spend on infrastructure, the fundamental growth of the economy is going to be a question, and success of any government or the nation will depend on the growth of the economy. And therefore, I think the signs will probably be in that direction.
Okay. Rina, speaking on behalf of all entrepreneurs and the ones watching this interview, what perhaps is the expectation that you're going with into the budget?
I guess, as the panel has rightly said, this forms sort of a report card. It highlights, you know, what the expectation would be in the budget, and a lot of the announcements have already been made. I think a key thing is that, which is good, is that the government is looking at more incentivizing as opposed to subsidizing. So that effectively is a longer-term solution, and it's one that will help businesses. In addition to that, you know, all the emphasis on credit to this, you know, small business sector and the entrepreneurs. I personally would like to see more on the angel tax. And I feel that while the government has done all these initiatives and, you know, wants to support startups, the angel tax effectively becomes a crippling factor.
Sure. I will come back and discuss the angel tax specifically, but someone on this panel had spoken about agriculture and the sort of boost coming as far as agricultural spending and, you know, trying to kickstart the economy. Another thing that the government is possibly looking at, and another tool that it has when it comes to giving some sort of revival to the economy, of course, is the income tax slabs. And we've seen some announcement on that. But very quickly, to all of you on this panel, anything more that we're maybe expecting?
So maybe at the lowest level, I think there could be some kind of exemptions, or maybe the threshold level could be increased. But I don't think it's going to be very substantial, because if you look at the way in which the government has presented its earlier four budgets, I don't think they've given too much away for the so-called middle class or the upper middle class. It's maybe for the lower strata, the lower section of middle class, maybe there'll be some kind of giveaways. Because there'll be always a question of saying that if you give any kind of benefits, you need to get it passed through the parliament, and it could be construed as being something being populist, and therefore there could be some kind of an opposition. So therefore, to my mind, it'll be probably just about making certain kind of minimum kind of adjustments to make it seem that they're doing something more for the general household. But I don't think it's going to be anything substantial.
Sure. Okay. Is that the general sentiment?
Maybe on the corporate tax rate, since the government, when it first came in, had given a vision that the idea was to bring down the overall tax rate down to 25%. Last year, they increased the minimum threshold, turnover threshold. It would be interesting to see whether any kind of positioning or signs are being given, whether that threshold could potentially increase, because when the credit itself in the market is low, one would expect at least some relaxation of taxation for a larger corporate so they can fuel growth through that.
Sure. All right, there are also two things specifically that have been announced for SMEs and MSMEs over the past couple of months, and I want to address those before we go into talking about some of the specific sectors. The first one, of course, is that announcement that we saw from the government saying we will now ensure that loans up to 1 crore are being sanctioned in under 59 minutes, that is in 1 hour. This is, of course, in continuation of what we've seen to all the announcements under the CGT MSE of, loans up to 2 crores which are given collateral free. So to all of you on this panel, has that been maybe exciting news, given the fact that maybe not too much of the collateral free loan was actually being seen by small businesses because of the liquidity crunch? What expectations are you placing on this announcement?
So I think it's definitely a positive step. I mean, I think if you fundamentally see how the government is looking to address the working capital problems in the SME sector, the first was around schemes where government is encouraging offering of collateral-free loans through the banking channel, right? I think the next step is really around the processes, right? Because when you think about what hinders the small business to get capital, it's not just the capital but also the process around getting that capital, right? The online, whether the application process, the documentation required, the time required. So the 59-minute scheme is definitely the step in the right direction, although it only approves the loan, but the actual disbursement is still something which might take 8 to 12 days. And at the end of the day, the government is still leveraging the banking channel to do it. So how quickly can banks adopt and change their processes to make it seamless and hassle-free for companies or SMEs to avail that credit would be something which we would continue to see.
Sure.
And I think in general, with the same continuing theme, the government is also focused on really, sort of building the data infrastructure which would allow banks and lending institutions to leverage that to approve SMEs, right? Okay. And that is like in the form of GST and all the electronic data which is getting created would be a big step towards enabling credit to SMEs.
Sure.
Actually, on this issue, I think I would rather sound cautious, because it's one thing to say that we need to give loans in an easier manner. But the second part is in this kind of an overdrive which we have, saying that, I remember some time back we said infrastructure, let's all into infrastructure, and today we have this NPA issue. So it shouldn't be a case that the due diligence is actually skipped. And in fact, I think one of the problems which is there is we should not be pressurizing banks to say that keep giving loans, give it in 59 minutes, because it sounds too simplistic to me. I've never been in the lending business. I've not been a borrower or a lender, so I really don't know what goes into it. But the thought that when I go for a home loan, it takes maybe a month before I get a home loan, and I have all my papers ready. Now we're talking of an SME who has not been properly identified. He's coming and asking for a loan, and you're giving it in 59 minutes. I think the banks will also have to be very, very cautious when they're going on this particular route.
Okay.
I'd just like to add, though, I think that just the factor that technology is now being used and implemented in a particular way will facilitate the entire process of collecting that data.
Sure.
And as he said, just policy making going forward with data at that level will just be tremendous in the long run. So it's definitely a step in the right direction. I think the NBFCs, which form, again, 50% of this, are not included now. We'll have to see over time how, that segment also comes in, because they are a large, key factor in the lending space as well to this group. So on the whole, it seems like it's at least a step towards implementing technology to facilitate, everything, which is tremendous. Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of steps, another thing that's been announced and introduced also is the restructuring of the debt restructuring as far as MSMEs are concerned, and the bad loans to MSMEs are concerned. Possibly a much needed move, given that we saw NPAs at a decade high. The small businesses were the ones that were getting hit. How optimistic maybe are you, all of you on this panel, about that move?
Sure. So I would say, I think any kind of sort of credit guarantee is almost like a double-edged sword, right? Because there's always the risk of how that would impact the behavior of these SMEs. When you know that the government is going to waive off your loans, I mean, we've seen that in the case of farm waivers as well, that there's sort of an impact on even good performing loans defaulting, because everybody knows that there's a waiver, right? So I think it is definitely something which has to be in place for banks to, for the government to encourage banks to lend to this segment where it's construed to be a high-risk segment, and some sort of a guarantee from the government for defaults is something helpful. But how it gets implemented would actually have an impact on, what the sort of eventual impact is.
Okay.
I think I would add that just a little different dimension is to see that it's not just the money that you lend. I think for businesses, especially for SMEs, MSMEs, I think it's the ease of doing business as well, which needs to be seen into. A lot of the money that actually gets invested gets wasted away in going through the procedural bottlenecks in trying to set up your business or set up a plant in case you're into manufacturing or related businesses. And I think this is where we see there's a lot of disparity between the different states. So we have seen that there are certain states in India which are exceptional in terms of helping businesses actually get off the ground, not only in terms of the credit aspect, but in terms of the overall setup that they make, whereas there are other states that are lagging far behind.
No, I mean, I agree with what's been said. It's definitely not something that if it is going to promote misuse of the loans, or the idea that I can get a waiver eventually, that's not the objective. I think just putting in place the right way of implementation of this will be critical in seeing how effective it is.
Okay, we're going to take a very quick break on that note, but much more on the other side, talking about what you, the entrepreneur, can expect from this budget. Just stay tuned. Back after this short break. Welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow, and tonight on the show we're talking about expectations from the interim budget for small businesses with an expert panel, understanding what some of the changes you could look forward to if you are an SME. I very specifically want to talk about the logistics industry first up, and just read out some statistics which I'm sure, infrastructure logistics, which I'm sure you're aware of, Abhishek. 2018-19, the budget allocation was nearly 65,000 crores as far as infrastructure development was concerned, but the requirement is about 50 trillion by 2022. At least those are the numbers we're picking up. My question really is to you, who is a player in this space. Maybe one or two things that you would like to tell our viewers that you definitely are hoping to see for the logistics space, and also tie that in maybe to the infrastructure needs, the kind of funding that has already gone to the space, and what you would like to see in this budget.
I think the first thing starts from what the announcement that was made last year, which I pointed out, that since logistics was given an industry status, I think we are all looking for what's the next steps. There's a lot of euphoria, there's a lot of good positive vibe that we've got in industry status, but I think what we would look for is, along with that, again related to if there are specific credit schemes or credit mechanisms being put in place, they must be directed towards this industry. The infrastructure growth, I think, has been quite good, but maybe only in certain specific sectors. If you look at the overall road transportation segment, I think that's where the biggest infrastructure outlay or probably the level rate of development has happened, but we need to tie it in with the other measures. I mean, ever since GST came into play, we've all spoken about faster movement of trucks provided with RFID tags and things like that, but I think in terms of what I see on ground in terms of implementation, I think we're still some distance away from having that coming in place fully. The concept of e-way bills, which was introduced along with GST, I think while it's a very, very excellent piece of law that is written, but to really implement it in a country like India, with the extreme levels of diversity that we see, you have a person with one truck also being a transporter and large players such as us as well. I think something must be done to create a lot more parity, a lot more, I would say, clear guidelines coming in, like some of the sectors went through, where you had an authority or a body coming in that started putting down the rules and regulations which allow for that sector to grow well. I think this industry is looking for something in that direction. So whether this government or the new government that's about to come should try and focus on this.
Sure. Very quickly to both Madan as well as Abhishek, my question is in terms of PPP, and if you can comment on the fact that PPP in the infrastructure space has come to almost a standstill because we haven't really seen any way forward as far as the stressed assets program is concerned. And we've been talking about the liquidity crunch and what's really going in the infra space. Are you expecting much movement in 2019?
So in 2019, we would be expecting more in the second half of the year once we have a new government and the policies are known and the overall framework of how the budgets would also work. And we should also keep in mind that while we keep emphasizing a lot on the central government budget, I think the state government budgets are also very important, because at the grassroots level, it's actually the state governments which really affects the players. Now, when we're talking of infrastructure, we're talking of PPP, we all know that it hasn't quite worked out the way in which it was envisaged. And there needs to be more action coming from the governments. And I think today what we have seen, any investment taking place in infrastructure has come from both the central government and the state governments. And they have their own constraints when it comes to maintaining their difficult FRBM targets, which means that we need to have more private investment coming in. So the thing is to provide the right kind of incentives. And I think that's going to take a bit of time, maybe not in 1920. The reason being that until the overhang of NPAs, especially in the infrastructure sector, is tackled, only then will we see fresh investment coming in. So I think we may probably have to wait for another year before private sector investment comes into this space.
Okay, let's also very quickly talk about one positive, and I know you've been, sounding a note of caution as far as several pockets of the economy is concerned. But one thing that's definitely a positive is what is happening as far as the roads and highway construction is concerned. Maharashtra, in fact, has the highest number of ongoing projects at 52. So both in terms of the kind of funding that's coming into the system, in terms of the infrastructure and logistics space, that is definitely seeing a positive impact out of that. That's definitely possibly a silver lining as far as what's going on in the economy right now.
And I suppose if you look at the central government budget and see where exactly have they been spending, it's been roads, it's been railways to a certain developed urban development. These are the three areas where the government has been spending money. So I think what we are seeing happening very positively is definitely in the road sector. But if we're going forward to saying that is it really coming down to the logistics sector, the answer is very much limited. And I would tend to think it's more in the domain of state governments to take the initiative here.
Okay, you would agree?
I think there's, as Madan rightly pointed out, maybe the later part of 2019-20 or early 2020s when with the new government settled, we will get the better signs. But I hope that when they do that, they do take some lessons from why the previous governments or their efforts to invest or get more structural developments happening did not work. I think there's a great opportunity for the government to really look at a more inclusive approach towards growth, or even looking at this sector. I think players in this industry, if they are welcomed in a more open way to be a part of a larger group of people included to make the decision, or at least chart the path forward, it'll make more, I would say, result-oriented an approach. And that would mean that whatever you invest and whatever you put in place is ultimately going to get properly used by the players in this industry. And therefore, those returns will come, which will prevent NPAs or similar structural defaults from happening in the future.
Okay. Very quickly, let me come to you, Rina, and talk about angel tax. That's been a long-standing demand, if I can call it that, on part of the entrepreneurial community. What are you likely expecting?
I think there has been a lot of sort of amendments in the recent past, whether that be, who is, applicable from a startup perspective versus, which companies would fall under, or what a type of angel would be taxed. But fundamentally, angel tax really goes against the whole concept of getting funding for a company which does not have assets. You'll see that I think over the past few months, over 1,000 startups have received notices, and it's these income tax officers simply cannot understand how a company can be valued so high when they're reporting losses, and they tend to treat it as a startup and a regular company the same. So I think there's got to be some kind of clarification, some kind of guidance towards that. Otherwise, what you're doing is, on one hand, you're giving incentives, but on the other hand, you're making the process so cumbersome that you're discouraging investors to invest at that seed or angel stage. It is a very, it's become now a very sort of time-consuming process that was already very cumbersome to raise finance at the seed and angel stage.
Very quickly then, before we close this panel, I have two things that I want to discuss. We were talking about trade. I definitely want to talk as far as the outlook on the rupee is concerned. What could be the impact that we're likely to see on SMEs going forward into this year, and also what should we keep in mind when it comes to some of the macroeconomic events that are likely to unfold in 2019, and the impact the small businesses can see and how they should really de-risk their businesses. And this is open to all of you on the panel.
See, first on, if I could just go back a little bit on the FDI, which we spoke of. I think the FDI flows are more likely to be just about stable and continue at the same level which we saw in 2018. The reason being that we should look at two sets of factors. One, if we're looking in terms of the overall supply of funds, I think that's very important, and that depends upon what happens to the global economy. And currently what we're seeing is that the US economy is on the way of an upward movement in their growth. There could be some kind of recovery taking place in the Euro region, in UK, in Japan, in which case the overall supply of funds which goes to the emerging markets in the form of both FDI and FPI would tend to be a bit restrained. Now, on the other hand, if you look at India, will always be a favorite as far as FDI is concerned, because I think India has a lot of lacunae. When you have a lacunae in various sectors, it means there are so many opportunities for people to invest. Couple this with the fact that India is going to remain one of the fastest growing economies in the next maybe decade or so. I think India will be a very good destination for FDI. But I think, again, not to really spoil your fun when you're talking of SMEs, we should see where exactly has FDI been coming in. It's been mainly into the service sector.
Sure.
And within services, if you see the financial sector, look at the software sector, the telecom sector, these are the ones which have actually been dominating. So while definitely there would be certain percolatory effects to the other segments, but I think let's not be over-optimistic saying that there's going to be big bang FDI coming into the SME segment. That will probably take some time. Now, if I just take the second issue on the exchange, the currency will probably remain along its regular path. We're talking in terms of a 3 to 4% depreciation in the rupee. So as far as we're concerned, we're talking of the rupee today at 70, 71. We could be expecting it to go towards 73, 74 by the end of 2019. And I think the message for the SMEs, anybody who has forex exposure, is to just look at what would be the alternative cost of hedging. I think hedging your forex exposure will be very important. That will be the message for them.
All right, run out of time on this special panel discussion. Rina, Abhishek, Madan, Pushkar, thank you so much for your time here tonight. That's counting down to the budget on this pre-budget special panel discussion. If you have any feedback for us, we love hearing from you. Here's how you get in touch. leadersoftomorrowtimesgroup.com is our email ID. Get in touch with us also on social media. Tweet us your queries at Sunanda_J, which is my official Twitter handle. You can also reach us at LOT_ET now, or leave your comments for us on our Facebook page, Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now. Have yourselves a good night. Thanks for watching.